Hey guys! Tonight we're venturing deep into the windswept hills and mossy plains of medieval Iceland, where the only thing more unpredictable than the weather is the sheep. Yes, the sheep, whose eyelids once served as primitive but oddly accurate storm detectors. You're bundled up in a scratchy wool cloak, trudging up a fog-draped hillside, and there's this unsettling silence in the air, the kind of silence that whispers, a snowstorm's coming, even though it's technically midsummer and the sheep seem way too calm for your liking. Your boots sink into the soft earth with a gentle squelch. Wind teases the edge of your hood, and every breath you take smells like damp grass, salt spray, and just a hint of sheep dung. The flock ahead doesn't seem particularly concerned, but then again, you're not fluent in sheep. A small ewe turns her head slowly toward you. Her eyelid twitches once, twice, and a nearby shepherd narrows his eyes as if the twitch told him something. Maybe it did, because in this strange land of lava fields and volcanic fog, the sheep have secrets, and their eyelids are apparently the gateway to understanding the wrath of the sky. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere far away, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these sleepy history rambles travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking across a low plain dotted with sheep, most of them silently grazing under a gunmetal sky. There's something very old about this place. You can't see any modern roads, no electricity poles, not even the ghost of a cell signal, just wind, stone, and a feeling like the world is holding its breath. The shepherd walking beside you doesn't talk much. His beard could store breadcrumbs, and his boots are stitched together from at least 4 different animals. He nods toward the sheep occasionally. They know, he mutters, pointing toward one that's blinking fast and furiously. Storm's near. You give a polite nod, even though you have no idea what he's talking about. What does it mean that a sheep is blinking a lot? Is she just sleepy? Got wool in her eye? Or is she sending coded warnings about hailstones the size of potatoes? That question, surprisingly, has occupied minds for centuries in this part of the world. Long before radar, barometer, or meteorological satellite data, Icelandic shepherds had to rely on instinct, folklore, and livestock with apparently supernatural forecasting abilities. And when you're stuck on a treeless rock in the North Atlantic with unpredictable weather and limited access to coffee, you learn to observe everything, including how your sheep are blinking. You stop for a moment and sit on a lichen-covered stone. The view is breathtaking. Endless open sky, layered cloud banks hanging heavy and low, and a flock of sheep that seems more philosophical than practical. They move slowly, deliberately, each twitch of their ears and blink of their eyes loaded with what might be profound meteorological meaning or nothing at all. That's the joy of Iceland. Everything feels ancient and possibly magical. Historians still argue whether this sheep eyelid theory was a widespread belief or more of a regional curiosity, passed down in hushed tones like a family recipe for disaster prevention. But what we do know is that Icelandic shepherds were constantly battling the elements and desperate for any edge they could get. A gust of wind sweeps across the plain, bringing with it a sting of sleet and the distant sound of a waterfall. The old shepherd pulls his wool cap lower over his ears and says something you can't quite catch. It might have been a prayer, or maybe just a reminder to check the eyelids again. You find yourself watching the sheep more carefully now. Are their eyes watering? Are they squinting? Is that one looking annoyed? According to folklore, irritated or unusually active eyelids were thought to respond to drops in atmospheric pressure, a subtle biological response that shepherds could supposedly interpret with eerie precision. It sounds absurd, until you remember that people also once predicted frost by licking rocks, or thunder by counting how many times their dog sneezed. Compared to that, staring into a sheep's eye doesn't seem that weird. The light shifts, sun trying and failing to break through the clouds, and a drizzle begins to patter against your cloak. You tuck your hands into your sleeves and glance at the sheep again. A big ram nearby is blinking furiously and shuffling uncomfortably. The shepherd gives you a knowing look. Give it 20 minutes. He says, sleet. He's right. 20 minutes later, the temperature drops noticeably, and the drizzle turns into sharp little ice pellets. You retreat into a shallow cave with the shepherd, while the sheep huddle together like nervous clouds. You sip on lukewarm something from a goatskin flask. It tastes vaguely like burned tea in despair. The shepherd doesn't offer more, which is probably for the best. Lightning flashes in the distance, but the sound comes much later. The storm isn't quite here yet, but it's close. And somehow, the sheep knew first. Maybe it's just biology. Maybe it's folklore stretched into myth. Or maybe, in a world as wild as medieval Iceland, people looked to what they trusted and they trusted the sheep. You're soaked now. The storm that the sheep so kindly warned you about is in full swing. Wind whips across the hills like a freight train made of ice and bad intentions. Rain lashes sideways, penetrating every layer of your supposedly weatherproof cloak. The sheep, smug and eerily calm, have already formed a tight cluster, heads turned away from the wind, like a well-rehearsed choir of wool. You crouch behind a boulder with your shepherd companion, who's too seasoned or perhaps too stubborn to flinch. He's watching the sheep, not the sky, not the clouds, not even the barometer-shaped rock someone left by the trail. Just sheep. Specifically, their eyes. Why eyelids? You finally ask, not because you expect a sensible answer, but because it's either that or freeze in silence. Why anything? He replies, shrugging. You watch. What watches the wind? That's not helpful. But the more you think about it, the more you realize he's not entirely wrong. In a land where the weather changes its mind faster than a toddler in a candy aisle, any reliable sign, no matter how small or furry, is worth noting. Sheep were everywhere. Always had been. In fact, they outnumbered the people of Iceland by a comical margin. And those eyelids, apparently, were nature's twitchy little storm alarms. You dig deeper into your mental archive. There's actually a grain of logic to this. Fluctuations in atmospheric pressure before a storm can cause mild discomfort or inflammation in the mucous membranes of animals. Humans might get headaches, dogs get antsy, and sheep, well, they blink. A lot. Their eyes water. They squint at nothing. Just like you squint at your phone trying to read a forecast with 0% accuracy. It wasn't just the blinking, either. Shepherds also noted if the sheep seemed extra sluggish, rubbed their faces against rocks, or began acting slightly off. But the eyelids were the key. Too dry. Clear skies. A little puffy. Mild drizzle. Blinking like they're trying Morse code. You might want to start building an ark. Historians still argue whether this eyelid-based forecasting system was an isolated phenomenon or part of a broader oral tradition of animal weather symbiosis. Some claim it was common in the highland regions, where exposure was greatest, and sheep served not just as food and wool producers, but as fuzzy barometers. Others insist it was more of a fringe belief, passed down in specific families, more superstition than science. But honestly, when you're clinging to a hillside while hail the size of marbles pings off your hood, does it really matter? If a sheep's eyes twitch and you find shelter in time, you're not going to debate epistemology. You're going to say thank you and keep your socks dry. The storm, for its part, doesn't care. It howls. It roars. The boulder you're crouched behind is slick with moss and beginning to smell distinctly like wet sheep. The shepherd pulls out a chunk of something wrapped in old linen. It might be cheese. It might be leather. You're too cold to argue and choose thoughtfully. You get used to it, he says, gesturing toward the chaos, the weather, the waiting, the wool. You glance at the flock again. The sheep aren't blinking much now, just hunkered down, eyes half closed, lashes catching raindrops like tiny gutter systems. Their expressions suggest a deep existential boredom. Or maybe they're just asleep. Whatever the case, the storm finally begins to move on. Not quickly. Nothing in Iceland ever rushes except the wind, but steadily. The rain eases. The clouds thin just enough to reveal a watery shaft of light slipping between them. It's not exactly sunshine, but you take what you can get. You stand and stretch, joints stiff and cloak-soaked. Your boots squelch with each step. The shepherd rises too, brushing his hands on his trousers, which appear to be made of some extremely stubborn wool. "We'll move the flock lower," he says, as if this whole eyelid-watching storm-evading ordeal was just another day at the office. As you walk alongside him, picking your way through wet tufts of grass and suspiciously soft ground, you start to appreciate the sheer oddness of this practice. It's not like these people didn't want better tools, but when you live in a country where wood is scarce, metal is precious, and the nearest meteorologist is probably asleep under a glacier, you work with what you have. And what they had was sheep, lots and lots of sheep, who just so happened to wear their feelings on their eyelids. Some scholars point out that animal behavior has long been used in weather prediction worldwide. Frogs croaking loudly before rain, birds flying low, cows lying down. But Iceland, always the overachiever in weirdness, leaned hard into the sheep. There's even one documented 17th century letter from a Danish cleric stationed in the northwestern fjords complaining that his host family refused to travel because the sheep's gaze was sour. He thought they were mad. They thought he was wet and shivering. So who's laughing now? By the time you reach the edge of the next valley, the sky has cleared to a kind of sullen gray that counts as pleasant in this climate. The sheep begin to spread out again, grazing tentatively, no longer huddled or twitching. You watch their eyelids, calm, unbothered, dry. The shepherd nods approvingly. "We've got a few hours," he says. "Maybe more if that one over there stays sleepy." You look where he's pointing a chunky ram with one ear and a lazy blink. He looks exactly like you feel. You sit down in the grass, wet coat be damned, and close your eyes for a moment. The wind hums softly now, more lullaby than menace. The sheep munch contentedly. Somewhere in the distance, water flows down a mossy cliff, the sound like a whisper in a dream. And you think to yourself, maybe this is all nonsense. Maybe these people just needed something, anything to make sense of a world so unpredictable it could turn on you in a heartbeat. But then again, maybe the sheep really do know something we don't. You're too tired to decide. You wake to the soft squish of hooves nearby. A sheep is chewing in your general direction, eyes half-lidded, jaw working in slow, dreamlike circles. The rain has stopped entirely now, though everything around you remains soaked, including your sense of dignity. The shepherd's already a few steps ahead, staff in hand, posture casually stooped, as if to say, "Yes, I survive this daily. No big deal." You stand slowly, brushing damp moss off your sleeves, and follow. As you walk, he starts talking again this time, about the weather. Not just today's little tantrum, but Icelandic weather. The beast, the legend, the thing you do not joke about unless you want it to hear you and make you regret everything. "This land hates straight lines," he mutters. "Wind goes where it pleases. Rain doesn't fall, it attacks. Snow waits until spring and then shows up late out of spite." You smile, thinking he's joking, but you look up at the sky, then at your still wet boots, and you realize he's dead serious. And yet, for all its drama, Iceland's weather has always been a central, inescapable force in people's lives. You start to understand why these shepherds became so obsessed with predicting it. Out here, storms weren't just inconvenient, they were deadly. A single miscalculation could strand you on a mountain with a dozen sheep and no way home. That twitchy sheep eyelid wasn't just a curiosity, it was a life-or-death barometer. Historians still argue whether the ferocity of Icelandic weather shaped its entire cultural outlook. Some say the stoic humor, the fatalism, the extreme self-reliance, they all stem from trying to farm on a slab of volcanic stone being continuously blasted by Arctic tantrums. You pass a stream now, swollen and fast-moving, its banks dotted with black volcanic stones that glisten like wet coal. The wind whistles through the canyon above, echoing in strange, circular bursts. It sounds like distant singing, or sobbing, or a very tired sheep trying to sing Bjork. The shepherd taps the side of his nose. "Wind's turning," he says. "Might get fog." You glance up. The sky is graying again, but slowly this time, the kind of slow that pretends to be harmless before ambushing you with freezing mist and poor visibility. You keep walking. As you hike, You pass ruins low, moss-covered stone walls barely poking above the grass. Turf homes, maybe, or sheep shelters. It's hard to tell. Iceland doesn't really erase its past. It just lets it settle quietly beneath lichen until someone trips over it centuries later and calls it an archaeological find. These ruins, your guide explains, belong to a family wiped out during a blizzard in the 1600s. No warning, no time to react. They hadn't listened to the sheep. Or maybe the sheep didn't say anything that day. Maybe even woolly prophets get tired. The thought lingers as you pause on a ridge. The view from up here stretches endlessly. Rolling hills like crumpled velvet, steaming vents dotting the far landscape like dragon nostrils, and distant waterfalls threading their way down black cliffs like delicate silver stitches. It's beautiful in a raw, untamed sort of way, the kind of place that doesn't care if you're impressed. It simply is. You sit down beside a stone marker, an old boundary post etched with runes so faint you almost mistake them for scratches. The shepherd doesn't explain what it says. Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe the rock just feels important. He opens a pouch and pulls out a bundle of dried herbs, crushes them in his palm, and sniffs. Keeps the lungs warm. He offers, handing you some. It smells like smoked hay and pepper. You inhale. It clears your sinuses with a vengeance. As you sit together in silence, he points out shapes in the landscape ridges that tell him which direction the next storm might come from. Rock shadows that mark ancient grazing paths. Even a patch of grass that curls slightly in warning before high winds. But it's always the sheep he returns to. They walk differently when a squall's coming. Eyes blink more, heads lower. You watch enough, you learn to read it. You have to. He tells you a story, then quietly, with the rhythm of someone who's told it too many times. Years ago, a cousin ignored the signs. The sheep had been blinking all day, eyes watering, heads twitching. But the cousin figured it was nothing, went out with the flock anyway. They found him 3 days later, curled beneath a rocky outcrop, arms around 3 sheep he'd tried to shield from the cold. He'd survived, barely. The sheep, not so lucky. After that, the shepherd says, he watched Eyelids every day. It's not a joke. Not even a little bit. And you begin to see this strange sheep weather code not as silliness but as ritual, reverence, survival. Some fringe scholars argue that Icelandic weather-watching rituals were a form of folk divination that in the absence of reliable instruments, people created mythic systems to lend order to chaos. But even the skeptics admit that much of what passed for superstition in Iceland was really just close observation, passed down across generations too stubborn to die. And let's be real, how different is that from your weather app giving you a 90% chance of some rain, maybe, or perhaps a freak tornado followed by sun? At least sheep don't lie. The fog begins to roll in, right on cue, not a dramatic curtain drop, but a slow unfurling of gray across the ground. It creeps low, clings to the rocks, slips into your nostrils like damp wool. Visibility drops to about 10 feet, then less. You can still hear the sheep soft bleats, gentle munching, but they're vague shadows now. Blurred ghosts with legs. You hear the shepherd click his tongue once. The flock starts to move. No barking, no staff waving, no shouting, just one click. And they begin drifting down the slope like woolen clouds. You follow. Your world shrunk to a 5-foot circle of colorless haze. Each step is uncertain. But the rhythm of the sheep and the soft jangle of a bell keep you from drifting off course. The eyelids. You think they saw this coming. You're stumbling downhill now, enveloped in fog so thick, it might as well be curdled milk. Every rock looks like a sheep, and every sheep looks like a rock. Until one of them bleats in protest as you nearly trip over its flank. You mumble an apology. Because honestly, at this point, you trust the sheep more than yourself. Your shepherd companion is just a vague silhouette ahead, barely visible through the mist. His voice floats back to you like a thought you almost forgot. It's always the same. First, the eyes, then the fog, then the panic. You almost laugh, but you don't, because you're beginning to understand what he means. This isn't just about watching animals twitch. This is about survival. How to keep livestock alive. How to keep yourself alive. When you live in a place that seems permanently annoyed that humans dared to settle here, welcome to the medieval Icelandic shepherd's life. You're not just herding sheep. You're managing dozens of small, wool-covered barometers while trying to avoid being blown off a cliff. Your cloak is heavy, your boots are muddy, and your sense of direction is a sad joke, but you're still moving. And the job never ends. In a landscape where weather can turn from pastoral to apocalyptic in a matter of minutes, shepherds had to be more than animal herders. They were forecasters, healers, shelter builders, wool experts, lambing midwives, and sometimes, if things got truly bleak, gravediggers. All before lunch, historians still argue whether the shepherd's role was as central as saga poets made it seem. Some say they were lonely outcasts, sent to remote highlands with a few crusts of rye bread and a prayer. Others believe they were among the most respected figures in rural communities, guardians of food, economy, and folklore alike. Either way, you couldn't be a fool and survive the job. You round a bend and stumble into a narrow valley, the fog finally lifting just enough to reveal a low turf hut built into the hillside. Its roof is thick with moss and tiny wildflowers, as if the earth decided to grow a wig. Smoke curls lazily from a stone chimney. Inside, you find rough wooden beams, the smell of damp wool, and a pot of something vaguely edible steaming over the fire. The shepherd tosses a bundle of kindling onto the flames and gestures for you to sit. "Wool stew," he says, and you're not sure if he's joking. You hope he's joking. Around you, the tools of his trade line the walls. A weather-warped crook, leather bags filled with dried herbs and sour milk, small knives, a comb that looks like it's fought more than one battle, a little wooden stool covered in fleece, and pinned above the hearth, a piece of parchment, faded ink, scribbled diagrams. You lean closer and realize it's a chart, a sheep eyelid chart. There are categories: slight flutter, delayed blink, persistent watering, and your favorite guilt-ridden squint, apparently indicative of either hail or sheep dishonesty. This was their science. Observational, experiential, oddly specific, and honestly, more detailed than half the weather reports you've ever seen. It's hard not to be impressed. He pours you a bowl of stew. It tastes like boiled socks with a hint of garlic, but it's hot. And that's all that matters. You sit there, chewing slowly, listening to the wind rattle the roof like it wants to be let in. Sheep save lives, the shepherd says between bites. You just have to listen. Eyes first. Always the eyes. You glance out the tiny window. The fog is shifting again, receding now, curling back into the hills. The sheep outside are lying down, calm. They're blinking slow and satisfied. You feel an odd sense of security watching them. If they're not worried, you figure neither should you be. But you also notice something else. Despite the hut's warmth and the stew's questionable ingredients, there's no real comfort here. The walls feel temporary, the tools functional but worn. This isn't a cozy retreat, it's a base camp. A bunker, designed not for living, but surviving. Medieval shepherds in Iceland often spent months in these shelters, rotating between mountain pastures and lowland fields, depending on the season. They followed the flocks wherever the grazing was best, hauling supplies over rocky ridges and through icy streams. The landscape didn't allow for comfort, only movement, and the sheep, as ever, were both guides and burdens. Some fringe researchers suggest that shepherds began to anthropomorphize their sheep, giving them names, attributing wisdom to them not just out of fondness, but out of necessity. Spending months alone with nothing but livestock for company, you'd start to see patterns in their behavior. You'd need to, that squint, that twitch, maybe it meant something, maybe it didn't, but if it saved your life once, you'd watch for it every time. A gust of wind smacks against the hut like a warning knock. The shepherd barely reacts. He's stirring the pot again, muttering something about the sky smelling too clean. You are not sure what that means, but he seems concerned. You look to the sheep again. One of them blinks. Twice, slowly. The shepherd sees it too. He stands. Storm's not done, he says, just pausing. And suddenly, you feel the tension return. The stew grows cold in your bowl. The tools on the wall look a little sharper. The world outside is no longer scenic. It's back to being unpredictable, wild, and a little bit smug. This job, you realize, never gives you a day off. Not when the sky is your boss and the sheep are your weathermen. You pull your cloak tighter around you, sigh, and follow the shepherd out the door. The fog might have lifted, but the blink has spoken. Time to move. You step outside and instantly regret it. The air has that heavy, electric feel again, like a kettle left too long on the fire. Just shy of a whistle. The clouds above aren't moving fast, but they're shifting shape with unsettling intent, coiling and uncoiling like something alive. The shepherd doesn't speak. He just starts walking, so you follow. Again, this time, the sheep are ahead of you. They've spread out in a strange pattern, still close, but angled in a way that seems too deliberate to be random. A few are grazing, but most are doing that thing. Heads low, eyes half shut, lids fluttering with faint irritation. The blinking is subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like watching someone nervously check their phone every 10 seconds during a bad date. The shepherd glances back. "See it?" he asks. You nod. "Eyelid test," he says. Some called it nonsense. Others called it gospel. And so you ask the question that's been quietly blinking in your own head for hours now. How did this eyelid theory even start? He stops, plants his staff in the mud, and stares at the sky like he's about to recite scripture. "Long ago," he says, "there was no radar, no barometers, no priests of the sky, just men, sheep, and too many near-death experiences," which, to be fair, sounds like Iceland's national motto. You press for more details. And so, over the next few hills, wind at your back, wool at your heels, he tells you what he knows. The eyelid test, as it came to be called, wasn't officially codified in any medieval texts, not in any scientific sense. It was never written in stone, only whispered in barns and passed between frostbitten hands. But it had rules. You learn them as you walk. Rule 1. Watch the blink rate. More than 3 blinks per 10 seconds on a calm day. Trouble. Either the sheep is nervous, or the air pressure is shifting, or both. Rule 2. Look for tearing. Sheep don't cry for emotional reasons, but they do tear up when irritated by sudden humidity, changes common right before certain storms. Rule 3. Observe lid color. If the inner lid, when briefly exposed, shows a tinge of pinkish red, the locals believed it signaled high winds, or, as one old saying went, the mouth of the sea yawning. Rule 4. Never trust just one sheep. You need at least 3 to show symptoms before making camp or heading downhill. Solo blinkers were treated like false prophets or just allergic. Rule 5. Trust the sheep more than yourself. Always. Historians still argue whether this system had any measurable accuracy. Some suggest it was confirmation bias. Remember the times the sheep blinked before a storm. Forget the times they blinked and nothing happened. Others believe it was based on real, subtle environmental signs that humans learn to recognize only through their animals. But the shepherds, they didn't care about the scholarly debates. They had too many real-world receipts. Times when blink watching kept flocks from being stranded, families from freezing, or food stores from spoiling. You cross a small ridge, and suddenly the wind shifts direction. Sharp, cold, deliberate. The kind of shift that makes you instinctively hunch your shoulders. The shepherd mutters something in Icelandic, short, clipped, and definitely not a compliment to the wind gods. The sheep begin to tighten formation. There's no signal, no barked command, just movement, as if the entire flock decided, all at once, yeah, let's not die today. You hustle to keep up, your boots sliding in the wet grass, and you start to appreciate the brilliance of the system. These shepherds weren't just reacting to the weather, they were anticipating it. They didn't rely on clouds or temperature alone. They watched the earliest warnings, the quietest twitches, and treated them like gospel. You glance at one particularly twitchy ewe. Her blink is slow and deliberate, like a tired librarian judging your book choices. Her eye is watering just slightly. She looks at you like you're the one who needs to keep up. You do. Soon, the path takes you into a narrow ravine, where wind whistles overhead but leaves the base mercifully calm. The flock moves smoothly, like they've been here 100 times. Maybe they have. You find a flat stone to sit on while the shepherd checks the rear. He returns with a handful of moss and begins dabbing his forehead. Humidity's rising, he says. Won't be long. You sigh. So much for the brief sunburst earlier. He sees your expression and chuckles. You learn to read the signs. Sheep just do it faster. You ask if anyone ever tried to document the system properly. Write it down. Turn it into a book or a manual. He shrugs. Some tried, but the sheep didn't cooperate. Hard to make charts from blinking, easier just to live it. Still, there are whispers of those who tried. You hear about a monk in the 14th century who apparently kept a blink journal recording sheep eye behavior next to weather changes each day for 3 years. The journal was lost. Of course, probably repurposed as kindling or lining for a stew pot. One fringe tale tells of a woman in the West Fjords who could predict weather days in advance just by sitting among her flock and staring silently. People came from villages away to ask her if their weddings would be sunny or if they should move hay early. No one knows what happened to her. One story claims she turned into a sheep herself. You hope that part's made up. You check the sky again. It's darker now. Not rain dark, but pressure dark. You feel it in your ears, your ribs. The sheep feel it too. One near you blinks, then shakes its head in that slow, pre-storm kind of way. The shepherd stands. We'll head down. He says, tonight's going to be rough. Eyes don't lie. And again, you follow the flock. The path down the hill is narrow, slick with rain-slicked moss and the crushed remnants of seasons past. Each step is a negotiation between gravity and your own clumsy boots. Ahead of you, the sheep descend with all the quiet confidence of storm-tested veterans. One of them even pauses to sneeze. You try not to read too much into that. The shepherd turns back to you with a small smirk. Thunder whisperer, he says, jerking a thumb toward the sneezer. Old-timers say a sheep sneezes just before lightning. I say it probably got grass up its nose, but still watch the sky. It's this blend of dry humor and dead serious ritual that keeps tripping you up. Because here, everything could mean something. And while you're still not convinced that a squint from a woolly quadruped should dictate your travel plans, you're also starting to suspect you might have frozen to death by now without their subtle alerts. You reach the valley floor just as the wind stops entirely. This is worse, because in Iceland, when the wind goes quiet, it isn't mercy. It's the inhale before the scream. The shepherd leads you to a small stone enclosure, half sunken into the ground. A turf roof has collapsed inward, but the sides still stand. It's shelter, just barely. You both crouch low inside, the sheep pressing together nearby in a dense, slow-blinking mass. And now, you wait. You've never heard silence like this. Even your breath feels too loud. The clouds above are motionless. The air tastes like cold iron. The sheep, completely still, eyelids twitching like nervous metronomes. Their eyes, glossy and wide, reflect the roiling gray above. The shepherd finally breaks the silence. There's a name for this moment, he says, storm eyes. You ask if he means the sheep or the sky. He just says, yes. In local weather lore, the storm eyes moment is the eerie calm before the blast. A window of unnatural stillness. Shepherds across Iceland learn to read the exact rhythm of this quiet, how long it lingered, how still the animals became, even how sharply the birds stopped singing. Historians still debate whether this was simply atmospheric pressure changes at work or a kind of collective, animal-based sixth sense. Some scientists argue that livestock, especially sheep with sensitive eyes and thin eyelid membranes, can feel micro-changes in humidity and pressure in ways humans can't. Others think the whole thing is a mix of luck and exaggeration. But the shepherds, they never doubted. He gestures to the sheep again. Look. There. See how she won't close her eyes all the way? That's not sleep. That's waiting. And he's right. One ewe lies motionless, her head resting on a patch of flattened grass. Her eyes flutter, but never fully shut. You find yourself staring too, holding your breath without meaning to. Then, thunder, low and long and far, like an angry beast rolling in its sleep beneath the mountains. The sheep don't flinch. That's the most unnerving part. They just blink as if confirming something you couldn't hear. The shepherd leans forward, eyes narrowed. There's something at that sound. Deep storm. Not fast. It'll take its time. You almost want to laugh like he's describing a particularly smug dinner guest, but then the first gust of wind returns. It doesn't knock you over. It presses flat and cold and insistent. The kind of wind that wraps around your ribs and hisses secrets into your ear. And with it comes the sleet. Not falling, not drifting, driving. Sharp as needles, fast as gossip. The sheep huddle tighter. The shepherd pulls his cloak over his face and hunches down beside you. Expression unreadable. And still, the eyelids blink. Once, he says quietly, I saw a sheep stare at the sea for an hour straight. Didn't blink once. Whole flock stood behind her. Didn't move. Sky was clear. Air was warm. Thought she'd gone mad. You wait for the punchline. Storm hit by nightfall. Worst I'd seen in 20 years. He shrugs like he's recounting a grocery list. She died that winter. The others didn't. There's no moral to the story. Just a sheep who stared too long, but it stays with you. The sleet turns to snow without warning. Thick flakes sticking to your sleeves, your hood, your eyelashes. The world around you begins to fade into white. You're not just watching the weather anymore, you're inside it. For a moment, you wish you had learned to read sheep eyelids properly. Maybe then you'd have packed warmer socks. The shepherd is scribbling something in a tiny notebook, weather patterns, sheep behavior, maybe doodles of blink diagrams. He doesn't say. You ask him how long this storm will last. He watches the sheep for a moment. That one's blinking slow. Calm? I'd say 2 hours. Then light wind. You want to doubt him. But considering you haven't seen a forecast since Thursday and he just predicted sleet with 100% accuracy using nothing but ovine eyelash data, you decide to accept it. The wind howls louder now. The snow comes harder. You pull your cloak tighter, curl your knees to your chest, and watch the sheep. Their eyes are open, but soft. Their blinks are steady. Predictable. The storm rages, and you start to believe, if only for tonight, that the sheep do know something you don't. The storm finally begins to lose its temper, sulking across the hills in slow, sullen gusts. It doesn't leave so much as it reluctantly retreats, grumbling all the while, as if offended that the sheep weren't more impressed. You sit there, stiff and half-frozen in your turf-side hollow, watching the last flakes of snow dissolve into slush. The flock is already up, shaking off the storm like they're clocking out from a mildly annoying shift. Your shepherd companion unfolds his limbs like a creaky drawbridge. See, he says, nodding toward a ewe lazily blinking at a patch of sky. Back to normal. You follow her gaze, and see it too, just a sliver of clear sky breaking through the cloud cover, like a ripped seam revealing daylight. A few stubborn sunbeams spill through, not quite warm, but bright enough to make the snow look less threatening. As you walk again, squelching with every step, you ask the obvious question. Did people ever write this stuff down? Did anyone try to make this sheep storm prophecy into something official? The shepherd scratches his beard and smiles. They tried. In their way, ever read the Book of Settlements? You shake your head, which is fair. Most people don't bring medieval Icelandic law codes on their evening hikes. It's not just law, he explains. It's stories, histories, lists of land claims. But buried in there, like bones in soup, you'll find little things. Mentions of sheep, of storms, of how someone's flock stood wrong before a blizzard, and so the family fled the valley in time. That's the thing about Icelandic texts. They rarely come out and say, here is our science. Instead, they fold knowledge into narrative sagas, legal records, even church sermons. And if you know how to look, you'll find the sheep. You reach a higher ridge, wind less cruel now, and your shepherd points out a tumbled wall in the distance. Old holding pen, he says, 15th century. Maybe families used to drive the sheep up there in summer, keep them pen, watch them. You squint at the rubble. Watch them for what? Eyelids, mostly. He says it like you've asked whether water is wet. He continues walking, boots crunching through leftover crusts of snow. There's one saga, he says a man refused to leave his home, even when the sheep began blinking and circling his house, claimed they were possessed. Drove them off, stayed put. You wait. He froze to death 2 days later. Body found under an overturned sled. No sheep nearby. You blink. Sometimes, he adds, you listen, even if it sounds stupid. Historians still argue whether sagas like this were moral tales or veiled survival guides. Icelandic culture has a long tradition of embedding practical advice in fiction. How to build a turf wall, how to recognize frostbite, or, yes, how to interpret sheep behavior when clouds roll in with murder on their minds. You pass a cluster of low stones grave markers, maybe, or foundations of forgotten homes. The air here feels older, quieter, like the land is holding its breath. One fringe theory you've read before suggested that early Icelanders believed sheep could see things humans couldn't, not just weather, but spirits, shifts in the earth. Omens, not that they were magical, necessarily, but attuned, sensitive, like furry little canaries in nature's coal mine. It's an idea that never quite made it into the textbooks, but it lingers in folk songs and old women's tales. The idea that your flock could save you not just through milk and wool, but through warning. The shepherd pauses again. That one, he says, pointing to a lamb blinking repeatedly, has been twitching since we left the valley. Might be nerves, might be something else. You watch the lamb for a while. Its ears droop, its eyes flicker. It's not panicking, but it's off. Should we stop? You ask. He shrugs. We'll go slow. That's the shepherd's way. Never panic. Never assume. But always pay attention. You skirt a narrow cliff ledge, and your shepherd tells you about an old monk, Brother Elias, who tried to translate sheep behavior into Latin, creating what he called the Codex Ocularum Ovinorum, or the Book of Sheep Eyes. It included diagrams, blinking rates, even comparisons between sheep and goats. Naturally, it was ridiculed in academic circles, but among rural farmers, it became an underground favorite. Lost in a fire, the shepherd says, or a flood, or eaten by mice. Depends who you ask. You nod, as is tradition. Down the trail, the land opens into a wide basin, rimmed by mountains and dotted with meltwater ponds that glint in the weak sun. The sheep fan out, munching as if they've never known fear. One curls beside a rock and closes its eyes, no more blinking, for now. And as you sit on a warm stone, drying your cloak and watching the horizon settle, it hits you. This was never about weather alone. It was about reading the world, tuning into the small, strange frequencies of life around you. Whether it's a sheep blinking, a shadow on the mountain, or the smell of iron in the air before the sky turns black, you lean back, hands behind your head, and close your own eyes. For the first time today, you don't need to look. The sheep will tell you when to move. The next morning breaks like old bread dry, pale, and slightly underwhelming. The sun isn't so much shining as it is thinking about shining, peeking through the clouds like it forgot its lines. The air feels suspiciously still again. You stretch stiff limbs, still wrapped in damp wool and sleep-crumpled thoughts, and glance toward the flock. They're already awake. Of course they are. Sheep don't get weekends. You rise and wander among them, scanning their eyes almost reflexively now. A few slow blinks here and there, some casual ear flicks, but nothing frantic. No tears, no twitching. The eyelid omens red, probably fine. The shepherd joins you a few minutes later, chewing on something that might once have been bread, or might just be dried regret. They're calm, he says, nodding to the flock. You nod back, as if this is now something you understand, as if you've become part of the secret woolen society. But as you sip lukewarm water from a leather pouch and gaze out across the fields, a question finally rises to the surface like a hiccup. Wasn't all this kind of weird? You ask the shepherd, gently, was there ever a time when someone thought all this was just nonsense? Like a countrywide prank? He grins, a little too wide. Oh, absolutely. And here begins the great Icelandic weather debate. Folklore or farce? He walks as he talks, staff tapping against rocks, sheep following in loose formation. You get 10 farmers in a room. He says 5 will swear by the eyelids. The other 5 will say they just blink more when they're tired. He pauses dramatically. But those 5, they lose more sheep. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Historians still argue whether Icelandic sheep watching was a genuine folk science or just a way to stay entertained during long, sunless winters. After all, when your landscape offers little in the way of distraction and your neighbors are lava rocks and unhelpful birds, you begin to see patterns where none exist. There's even a 19th century Icelandic satire that pokes fun at the grand shepherds, who claim the sheep blink Morse code before every rain. The fictional shepherd in the story misreads a blink and ends up building a storm shelter during a heat wave, losing half his flock to sunstroke and embarrassment. You can't help but chuckle. The idea of medieval Icelanders pranking each other with fake sheep signs is oddly comforting. You imagine one lonely farmer convincing his cousin that if the sheep blink sideways, that means it's Tuesday and a bear is coming. But the shepherd waves away your skepticism. It's not about being perfect, he says. It's about noticing, watching long enough that you start to see when the nonsense stops being nonsense. And honestly, you get it. Even in your own modern world, people track the ache in their knees before rain, the way birds vanish before a storm, or how cats get moody before earthquakes. Maybe the sheep thing isn't so different. Just a slower language, spoken in blinks. You pass another stone wall, this one newer, maybe a century old and etched crudely into one slab is a symbol, an eye inside a ring, with 3 small dots above it. You ask what it means. Eyelid sign. The shepherd says, farmers would mark it near shelters, meant watch your sheep here. Good lookout spot. Wind tells truth here. You wonder how many such markers are scattered across the countryside. Lost under moss or misread as random scratches, a hidden language of survival, blink by blink. You pause beside a stream, sheep clustered on the far side, drinking delicately, like they're attending a fancy tea party. Their movements are relaxed, their eyes undramatic. You take a moment to sit on a sun-warmed rock and pull your hood back. The air smells clean, like wet grass and volcanic soil. You hear distant gulls complaining overhead. And the wind has shifted, now a breeze instead of a force. The shepherd pulls out a small tin and offers you a bite of something he claims is salted sky bread. It tastes like dried sadness dipped in seawater, but you chew politely. And then, the strangest thing happens. One of the sheep sneezes, a sharp, squeaky burst that causes the entire flock to flinch. The shepherd's head snaps up like he's heard a gunshot. Uh-oh, he mutters. You raise an eyebrow again. He's dead serious. Birds sneeze before rain, but sheep, that's rare. Could mean sharp wind coming. You're not sure if he's joking or just trying to ruin your afternoon. Then another sneezes, and this time, even you flinch. The shepherd watches intently, then sighs. Let's keep low. I don't like the way they're standing. You glance at the flock. They're all facing the same direction now, staring, blinking slowly. You look that way too. Nothing there. Yet, you gather your things without protest. You're no longer rolling your eyes at sheep folklore. You're adjusting your pace by it. The sky remains pale and ambiguous, but the air tastes different, wetter, sharper. You feel the first sting of humidity on your skin. The sheep feel it too, and though part of you still wonders if this is a shared delusion, a cultural game of telephone played over centuries, another part, a deeper, quieter part believes, because this place is too brutal, too ancient, too intimate for coincidences, and the sheep, they don't lie. You've barely made it down the next slope when you realize it's not just sheep. Oh no, Iceland has an entire zoo of weird weather omens, and people who are absolutely convinced they work. Your shepherd seems to sense your thoughts. You think the sheep are strange, he says, adjusting the strap on his pack. Wait until you hear about the birds. You do. You hear all about the birds. According to local lore, if a ptarmigan, a kind of chubby, fluffy, low-flying Arctic chicken, lets out a high-pitched trill and immediately ducks its head, you can expect a thunderstorm. If it sneezes, rain. If it flies upward instead of across the field, wind is changing direction. If it explodes into panicked flight for no reason whatsoever, you cancel your plans immediately. Historians still argue whether these bird behavior forecasts were truly reliable or just post hoc justification for something everyone already suspected. But when you live in a place where weather can change faster than a toddler's mood, anything that resembles a pattern is clung to with the desperation of someone watching their last dry sock float down river. And then there were the geese. You pass a small pond, barely more than a puddle, and a few geese honk disapprovingly from the bank. The shepherd nods solemnly. See that? Loud, sharp honk. Not good. Could mean crosswind, or just bad manners. You chuckle. He doesn't. Apparently, if the local goose population suddenly starts migrating a week early, it's a sure sign of an early frost. And if the geese circle the village instead of flying straight out to sea, snowstorm. Possibly a betrayal. No one's sure. But birds weren't the only animal oracles in the Icelandic handbook. You soon learn about the fish. Yes, fish. Specifically, if you're gutting a cod, and its stomach lining looks unusually pale and shiny. Locals once took that as a sign that a storm was forming over the fjords. Some believed the fish could feel shifts in magnetic fields or barometric pressure even after death. Others just said it was the sea sharing secrets. You decide not to press too hard on the science behind that one. Then there were the dogs. A shepherd's dog, usually a compact, thick-furred herder with the attitude of a minor deity, was expected to sense changes in air pressure before a storm. If it whined and refused to lie down, thunder. If it lay with its paws over its nose, snow. If it barked once, looked offended, and left the hut entirely, everyone packed up and went home. One shepherd tale involved a dog named Coley who once stopped mid-chase, stared at the clouds, and ran straight for a cave. His owner followed, confused. An hour later, a rock slide buried the trail they'd been on. Coley was fed dried fish and hero worship for the rest of his life. Your shepherd stops near a rocky outcrop where moss has overtaken most of the surface. He places a hand on it. This rock, he says, used to be a weather station. You blink, a rock. Yep, family tradition. You lick it. You stare at him, hoping, praying that he's joking. He is not. The taste changes before rain. He explains, gets slicker, sharper, might be minerals, might be madness, but my great-grandmother swore by it. You politely decline the invitation to taste test the weather. The thing is, it all sounds ridiculous until you realize it's not really about science. It's about survival. It's about attention, watching the animals, the wind, the grass, the way the sheep blink and the birds fall silent, and the rock somehow starts tasting like iron filings. Every creature, every detail, became a clue. Some fringe researchers have tried compiling these phenomena into actual predictive models, blending folk wisdom with meteorological data. One even created a spreadsheet titled Livestock-Based Atmospheric Indicators of Rural Iceland, 1790 to 1910, which includes such gems as goose honks irregular, interrupted by silence possible hail, sheep eyelids puffy and blinking in unison, sudden cold snap, cod organs shimmer oddly as it's time to move the boats. It makes sense? Not really. Was it used? Absolutely. You hike up another narrow path. The wind light again, but oddly warm now. The shepherd's eyes scan the sky. The sheep. Then, the pond where the geese have now gone completely silent. He stops. You stop. What is it? You whisper. He lifts one hand and points to a hilltop in the distance where a raven sits, wings half spread, facing away from the sun. 3 omens, he mutters. Silence. Backward bird. And sheep rubbing their faces. You look down. Sure enough, 2 ewes are dragging their faces against a rock like they're trying to erase them. One of them sneezes. Okay, you say, trying to keep your voice calm. Is that bad? Could be fog. Could be wind. Could be the mountains about to sneeze. You stare at him. He shrugs. That one's metaphorical. The sheep begin to cluster again. You sigh, hoist your bag, and get moving. Because whether it's eyelids, fish guts, or goose tantrums, one thing is clear. The animals always know first. And you finally learn to listen. By the time you reach the next pasture, the sky has gone from ambiguous to actively suspicious. The clouds hang low and lumpy, dark in the middle with that unsettling greenish tint like someone tried to paint a bruise across the heavens. The sheep aren't exactly panicked, but they've stopped eating, and they're standing a little too still. You don't like it. The shepherd has stopped speaking. He's watching the flock closely now, arms crossed, face set in quiet concentration. Then, for the first time since you started this journey, he pulls something out of his satchel that isn't made of wool or wood. It's a metal device, a barometer. You blink. He sees your surprise and chuckles softly. Thought I'd throw you off, didn't I? You admit, yes, just a little. Started using this a few years ago. He says, not because I don't trust the sheep, just wanted to check. You watch as he taps it, peers at the tiny dial, and nods. Dropping. Storm likely, but not soon. Wind'll pick up first. You ask if the barometer agrees with the sheep. Usually, but not always. He looks back at the flock. Sheep notice sooner. This thing just confirms. That's when it hits you. The weird, beautiful, quietly hilarious truth of it all. The eyelids came first. Long before measurements, before data points, before calibrated instruments and waterproof charts, there were animals. There was instinct. There were blinking sheep in the mist, trying to tell you something important. Historians still argue whether Iceland's folk weather systems were rendered obsolete or simply complemented by the rise of modern meteorology. Some say the traditional methods were discarded the moment the first anemometer arrived on a boat from Denmark. Others insist the best shepherds today still glance at their flock before checking their phone, and honestly, the shepherds are probably right. You sit down near a mossy stone fence and watch the sheep blinking slowly in the strange light. The barometer is silent now, clipped to a belt loop, swaying with each step your guide takes. You ask if scientists ever studied the sheep thing properly. Oh, they tried, he says, settling beside you. Some professor from Norway spent a whole summer watching them, set up cameras, took notes, wore a very expensive hat. You laugh. He left with a sunburn and a stack of papers that said, sometimes they blink more. That's it. Still, there were serious efforts. You learn that in the mid-20th century, a handful of Icelandic and Scandinavian meteorologists conducted small-scale studies, trying to correlate sheep behavior with shifts in humidity and pressure. Some results hinted at genuine patterns, especially blinking and agitation before sudden cold fronts, but nothing consistent enough to satisfy the rigors of modern science. One report, buried in a weather journal from the 1970s, even stated, sheep may demonstrate behavioral anomalies preceding certain storm conditions, though further study is hampered by the fact that sheep are sheep. Fair point. And yet you keep thinking about that blink. How shepherds for centuries trusted what their animals saw and felt. How a single twitch of wool-framed eyelid could change a day's plan, save a flock, save a life. How this wasn't superstition, it was slow, quiet science, patient observation, over centuries. The kind of data no grant-funded lab would ever bother to collect. It was lived knowledge. You ask the shepherd if he still trusts the sheep more than his tools. He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he gestures to a lamb just ahead, lying in the grass, blinking rhythmically. Its eye is glossy, a tear forming in the corner. That one's telling me we've got about an hour. You nod. It's all you need to hear. As the wind picks up again, you both rise. The clouds continue thickening, like a slow argument overhead. But the barometer, still unchanged. You move with the flock, keeping low through a narrow gully, and the sheep begin descent with a quiet urgency. No bleats, just soft hooves and shifting wool. And once again, the sheep were right. By the time the barometer finally dips into storm territory, the sky breaks loose. A cold wind screams across the hills. You duck under your cloak as snow swirls like a fever dream around you. But this time, you're already sheltered, thanks to the blink. The storm hits with all the subtlety of a falling boulder. One moment you're crouched under a turf overhang, watching the sheep press close like a slow-breathing wall of wolves, and the next, a gust of wind whips past and makes your ears pop. You clamp your hood tighter and peek out. Visibility is down to maybe 10 feet. The world outside reduced to snow, sleet, and the low drone of the wind scolding the earth. Inside your shelter, there's only the occasional grunt from a sheep shifting its weight, and the shepherd, leaning against a stone with the calm of someone who's sat through 100 of these. He looks over at you. See, he says, not smug exactly, just right. Didn't need a barometer after all. You nod, too cold and too thoroughly convinced to argue. For a while, you just sit there, listening to the storm batter the world around you. But the silence between gusts is what stays with you, those small, suspended moments where you feel like you're inside a snow globe just before someone shakes it again. And then, without much ceremony, the storm begins to wane. The wind drops from howl to hum. The snow slows. You hear the creak of ice melting where it landed too soon. You crawl out from under the ledge and brush yourself off. The air smells different, fresher, clearer. The sky is a pale, bruised blue now, clouds dispersing like arguments after the guests have left. The sheep, predictably, are already up. Some are grazing, others just stand blinking in the soft light, like they knew exactly how long this mess would last. You turn to the shepherd. Do meteorologists ever admit this works? He scratches his chin. Some do, quietly. You sit down beside a half-melted drift, letting the sun start drying your sleeves. Apparently, Icelandic meteorologists have long had an odd relationship with sheep folklore. In the early days of forecasting, when instruments were crude, coverage was patchy, and weather charts were basically wishful thinking. Some actually relied on farmers' reports. And those farmers, they didn't give wind speed or barometric readings. They gave sheep behavior. The flock won't lie down. The shepherd mimics, his voice rough and amused. My old ewe won't stop blinking. The ram's breathing funny. That sort of thing. Historians still argue whether these old reports made any meaningful difference in predictions. Some scholars believe the farmers' observations were filtered through confirmation bias. Weather was going to happen, so any twitch seemed prophetic, but others point out that, especially in the remote highlands, these reports were often eerily accurate. In fact, a small meteorological outpost in the eastern fjords once kept a log of sheep-based predictions, noting correlations between unusual blinking patterns and sudden weather shifts. One entry, dated June 1958, reads simply, "Ewe by the stone pile blinked continuously for 20 minutes. Blizzard followed. Coincidence?" The answer scribbled in the margin. Don't think so. The shepherd tells you about one meteorologist from the 80s, who became a minor legend for incorporating sheep reports into his forecasts. He'd appear on local radio saying things like, "Storm likely in the north confirmed by satellite," and "a particularly nervous flock in Skagafjordur." Listeners loved it. It became a thing. You imagine that scientific authority sharing airtime with squinting livestock. And honestly, it makes sense. Weather isn't just about numbers and graphs. It's about patterns, behavior, signs, about feeling the air shift and noticing when the creatures around you feel it too. You and the shepherds set off again, the path now glistening with meltwater. Patches of grass peek out between lingering drifts. The flock walks without fuss. As you descend a gentle hill, you spot another shepherd in the distance, older, wrapped in layers that look hand-spun, standing motionless in the middle of a pasture. A few sheep loiter near him, blinking slowly in the late daylight. He waves when he sees you. Your shepherd waves back. No words exchanged, just the slow, shared nod of people who've seen the sky do stranger things. You ask if there's any sort of formal shepherd's guild, a place where all this lore, eyelid charts, bird signs, twitch speed scales is passed down officially. The shepherd laughs. Nothing formal. Just families, neighbors. You watch someone do it long enough, you pick it up, or you freeze. Some of the younger farmers now have both tools, traditional observations and modern apps. They'll glance at their phone, check the blinking sheep, and hedge their bets. One eye on the radar, one on the flock. You pass a low-lying bog where steam rises faintly from thermal vents. The sheep avoid the edge instinctively. The shepherd watches their blink rate as they cross. All's calm again for now. You ask one last question. If all the tech disappeared, would you still be able to read the weather? He doesn't hesitate. Of course, I've got the sheep. And that's the thing. The devices are helpful, sure, but the wisdom of a creature that lives every hour of every day in the open air, that kind of sensor doesn't need batteries. It just needs watching. You're walking again, sun slanting across the hills now, turning the wet grass into a dull shimmer. It's not warm, exactly, but it's not punishing either. The sheep are at ease, snacking lazily, occasionally flopping over into full fleece puddle mode. The quiet between you and the shepherd is a content one, like two people who've shared a bunker and live to chuckle about it. He turns to you and says, as if he's been saving it for a good stretch of flat ground, "There used to be schools. You know, you blink. Sheep schools, shepherd schools," he clarifies. But he's smirking. Though honestly, same thing. Now this is something you haven't heard before. A whole training system for eyelid watching, for cloud listening and fleece mood reading. You prod him for more. He explains that back in the 1700s and into the 1800s, particularly during the peak of Iceland's rural expansion and post-disaster agricultural rebuilding, there were informal institutions, often just winter gatherings in churches or turf halls, where aspiring shepherds would come to learn their craft. Not in any grand lecture hall sense, but by sitting, observing, and passing down knowledge through storytelling, demonstration, and long nights by the fire. Blink apprentices, he says, eyes twinkling. That's what we used to joke. He describes how students were taught to memorize not just terrain, paths, and flock behavior, but the feel of weather. You'd be handed a wool-wrapped cup of sour milk and asked, "Tell me what the sheep would do if the fog thickens by morning." Or, you see a blink, a tail twitch, and one sneeze, do you move the flock? It was part ritual, Part science, part long game guessing contest. Historians still debate how organized these schools truly were. Some claim they were little more than seasonal mentoring by older shepherds. Others suggest that specific families ran these educational gatherings with regular structure, even grading their apprentices on reaction time and eye detection skills. Some families, the shepherd says, had blink diagrams carved into wood, training tools. Kids would sit there all evening identifying the signs. You imagine it, a classroom of fur-clad teens squinting at sheep drawings under torchlight, trying to tell the difference between storm blink and I got hay in my eye. It's both hilarious and deeply impressive. He tells you one particularly weird test they used. Students were blindfolded and walked through a flock. They had to guess which sheep were anxious just by listening to their breathing and hoof movement. Supposedly, the best apprentices could do it by smell alone. You can't help but laugh. Smell. He shrugs. Anxious sheep smell different. You try not to overthink what that smells like. And then there were the dream journals. Apparently, some shepherds kept detailed logs of their dreams about sheep, storms, and strange signs. Not because they thought dreams were magical, necessarily, but because they believed that if you spent every waking hour with your flock, even your subconscious would pick up on patterns you hadn't consciously processed. One shepherd, the man says, dreamed about a sheep blinking sideways, woke up, ran to the barn, moved his flock. That night, ice storm hit. Sideways, you ask, sheep can't even, I know, still happened. Fringe researchers have poured over a few surviving dream journals from rural Icelandic farms, trying to decode recurring symbols: blinking sheep, silent birds, upside-down clouds. Were these premonitions subconscious meteorology, or just the byproduct of too much fermented shark meat and not enough sunlight? No one knows, but the shepherds recorded them anyway. You ask if these schools still exist. Not like they used to, he says. Now it's more like mentorship. You tag along. You listen. You ask why the sheep aren't blinking today. You learn. He gestures toward the flock. Best teachers right there. Same one I had. You both watch a ewe slowly lower herself onto the grass and let out a deep, sighing bleat. That's a "we're fine" bleat, he says confidently. You try to memorize the sound. In the distance, another shepherd appears on a low ridge, moving slowly with his own flock. You wonder if he, too, was trained in sheep signals, taught to see weather not as numbers on a screen, but as tiny shivers in wool, eyelids twitching against the sky. And it strikes you this whole tradition is a kind of oral science, passed hand to hand, eye to eye, sheep to human. No equations, no charts, just attention, patience, and trust. The kind of learning that seeps in like fog, quiet, slow, and absolutely everywhere once you start noticing. Evening settles like an old quilt over the highland fields, patched light filtering through clouds, the wind smoothing out into a soft, rhythmic hush. You've walked most of the day, boots damp and legs heavy, but you don't feel tired. Not exactly. You feel tuned in. The sheep are slowing now, grazing with that aimless, end-of-day energy. A few curl into tight, fleecy spirals on patches of dry grass. You find a flattish rock and settle there, cloak wrapped tight, while the shepherd rummages through his satchel and pulls out something you didn't expect, a small bundle of carved runes. He lays them out between you on a faded strip of wool. The wood is worn smooth from years of use, the symbols etched deeply, with tiny black soot marks rubbed into the grooves. You look at him. You read runes. He shrugs. Some. Old habit. Learned from my grandmother. She used them mostly for weather, dreams, lost sheep. You try not to ask how a rune helps find a lost sheep, but he continues before you can. This one, he says, tapping a sharp-angled symbol, means eye or insight. Or sometimes just look closer. You stare at the rune. It does look like an eye, or maybe a sheep's face, if you squint. Apparently, in older Icelandic belief systems, there was overlap between sheep, storms, and the Veifrager, the invisible web of fate. People believe that storms weren't just random, they were written, not always in the sky, but sometimes in dreams, or in the way a sheep refused to blink, or in the pattern left by a hoof print just before the fog rolled in. Some of the old runes, the shepherd explains, were made to mirror the signs. You'd carve one after you saw it in the field, like writing it down, making sense of it. Historians still argue whether rune use in shepherding was real practice or post-Christian folk embroidery. But there are just enough odd mentions in sagas and family books to give the theory legs. He picks up another rune, this one more jagged. Storm rune, he says, carved after my uncle lost half his flock. Weather turned too fast. He didn't listen to the signs. You ask if he believes in all this, the dreams, the magic, the carved wood. He thinks for a moment. Then, I believe the world speaks softly. This helps me listen. And that's the thread tying all of this together. Not superstition, but attention, watching sheep, interpreting patterns, remembering the way your stomach tightens before the wind shifts, the dream where the sheep wouldn't open their eyes. You stare out across the field, where dusk is now turning the landscape into gradients of blue and gray. Somewhere, a sheep coughs, another yawns, a third, your favorite, gives you a lazy side-eye, blinks twice, and lies down with a grunt. And suddenly, you remember something strange the shepherd mentioned earlier. Sheep in dreams. You bring it up again, he nods. Ah yes, the dream sheep. Tricksters. Apparently, some Icelanders believed that sheep appearing in your dreams weren't just metaphors, they were messengers. The blinks, movements, and colors of sheep in dreams could signify coming weather, family changes, or even messages from the hulda folk, the hidden folk. Those dreams weren't just dismissed as random, they were cataloged, shared, whispered about during long winters. Once, he says, I dreamed of a black sheep blinking sideways at me, just like that. I asked my grandmother what it meant. She made me skip the next herding trip. Was she right? He nods. That same trail got buried by an avalanche. Would have been us in it. You don't ask whether the sheep saved him or the dream. Maybe both, maybe neither. But the belief in sheep as dream guides is surprisingly well documented in Icelandic folklore. Some farmers even had small dream charms, bundles of sheep wool, carved bones, and plant roots meant to attract helpful visions. A few rare diaries from the 18th and 19th centuries even contain blink dreams, nightly records of sheep blinking one, twice, 3 times, then disappearing into the mist. One entry from 1831 reads, sheep blinked 3, then 2, then vanished. Frost likely, cows restless, kept hay covered, proved wise. Fringe researchers, especially those interested in animal cognition and ancient weather systems, have pored over these records, hoping to unlock some deeper pattern, some lost system of semiotic sheep logic. But maybe the point wasn't precision. Maybe the point was simply that the land speaks, and sheep dreamed or real were just better listeners. The wind stirs again, cool now, but gentle. You look to the flock. No twitching, no squints, just one slow, tired blink after another. You settle deeper into your cloak, the rock under you cold but steady, and feel a strange comfort in knowing that even when your eyes close, the sheep are still watching. You wake before the sun does just barely, the skies still wearing its pre-dawn robes, a deep, solemn gray tinged faintly with rose at the edges. The air is so still you can hear the soft crunch of hooves as the sheep stir around you, foraging in near silence. You sit up, joints stiff, breath misting, and look around. The shepherd is already awake, of course, leaning against a mossy boulder. He's sipping from a steaming wooden cup, the smell of birch tea curling through the chill air. He doesn't say anything, just watches the sheep. You watch them too. A dozen eyes blink slowly in the dim light. No twitching, no tears, no odd squints, just calm, unhurried, wool-padded serenity. It's the kind of quiet that makes you believe the worst of the weather has passed, or at least that. For now, the sheep think so. And if the sheep think so, you've learned trust it. You stand, stretch, and wander among them. They seem unfazed by your presence now. One even nudges your knee with its forehead, more of a hello than a demand. You run a hand along its back, fingers tracing the thick fleece. Its eye flickers toward you, blinks once, then turns away. That blink feels like a blessing. You ask the shepherd, half joking, if people still use sheep eyelids today. In the age of radar maps and satellite loops, surely the woolly prophets have retired. He considers it. Not officially, he says, but you'd be surprised. Turns out, some of the old families still glance at the flock before checking their weather app. Not because they need to, but because they don't quite trust a forecast made in a Reykjavik office by someone who's never been blown sideways off a mountain pass. There's a woman in the East Fjords, he says, who claims she can still read eyelids better than any Doppler system, keeps her own charts, color-coded, laminated. You blink. Laminated. Oh yes, she's serious. And apparently, so are others. A handful of rural communities still log sheep behavior, not as superstition, but as cross-reference. One farmer in the South runs a blog where he posts weekly blink reports complete with videos. His YouTube channel is called Woolcast. You nearly choke, laughing. Woolcast. 15,000 subscribers. The shepherd mutters, clearly impressed. Some fringe meteorologists have even started revisiting the idea not because they believe in blinking sheep per se, but because animals do seem to react earlier to atmospheric changes than our machines can catch. Barometric pressure drops. The sheep are already adjusting. Sudden humidity spike. The eyelids twitch, and in a world increasingly obsessed with data, there's something weirdly modern about returning to observation-based forecasting, like reinventing the wheel and finding out it still rolls better when covered in fleece. You reach a crest in the hill, and the view is stunning. Endless ridgelines dusted with snow, valleys stretching into the sea haze, and below you, a dozen tiny white dots slowly moving across the green like crumbs on a velvet cloth. Other flocks, other watchers. You ask the shepherd if he thinks the sheep still know what they're doing. He doesn't hesitate. They've always known. And then he tells you something odd. I knew an old man, he says, who said sheep were sentinels, that they didn't just warn us, they were meant to. That's why they blink like that. A signal, not for each other. For us. You pause. He's not smiling. He's not joking. He goes on. He believed sheep could see things coming before we ever could. Not just storms, changes, shifts in the land. Things that unsettle the earth. You glance back at the flock. They're all facing the same direction. Again, heads lifted, eyes open, watching something far away that you can't see yet. The air feels just slightly wrong. Not dangerous, just unfamiliar. You get a bad storm, the shepherd says, and you ask the sheep when to move. But if the world starts to change, he continues, voice softer now. You ask them first. Historians would call that folklore, superstition, a charming little relic of a simpler time. But when you've sat through 6 storms, watched flocks blink the future into being, and seen weather bend to their rhythm more than once, you start to wonder. You descend the hill slowly, sheep parting around you like tired clouds. One pauses and blinks slow, long, deliberate, then keeps walking. That blink feels like an answer to a question you haven't asked yet. And maybe, after all this, that's the lesson. You don't always need to understand the signs to respect them. Sometimes, you just need to notice. It's nearly twilight now, that soft-bellied hour where light stretches thin and everything turns the color of wool and memory. The sheep are bedding down again, one by one dropping to the grass like dandelions folding for the night. The wind is quiet. The sky is no longer trying to prove a point. You and the shepherd settle near a large rock that's warm from the day's last sun. It radiates faint heat, like an old dog leaning against your side. You sit without talking for a while, just watching the flock and listening to the strange stillness that comes when nature decides for once to hold its breath. You ask him what he thinks will happen when the old blink watchers are gone. When it's all apps and graphs and satellite feeds, he smiles faintly. They'll come back. You tilt your head. Not the shepherds, he says. The habits. People. When things get uncertain again, when storms arrive faster than tech can track, or when the machines are wrong, and someone remembers, wait, my grandmother used to say, he trails off. But you get it. This knowledge, blinking sheep and twitchy dreams and thunderbirds and licking rocks, it doesn't die. It just hibernates, waits in a quiet place, like seeds under snow. You ask one last thing. Does he still need the sheep to tell him? No, he says, but I still ask. And with that, the flock begins to settle completely. The night sky unfurls overhead, cloudless now, an ocean of deep blue freckled with stars. A single sheep bleats softly and rolls over. The shepherd stretches out on the grass, hands behind his head. You follow suit. The moss is cold beneath your back but soft. Your eyelids grow heavy, and you wonder as you lie there with sheep breathing beside you like a lullaby, whether the world would be better if we spent just a little more time watching, not waiting for answers, just watching, for wind, for weather, for blinking eyes, and maybe, just maybe, for what's coming next. The stars shift slowly overhead now, and even the wind seems to move quieter, brushing against your face like the edge of a soft sleeve. Somewhere in the distance, a sheep coughs once, then nothing. Just the low hum of earth settling down for the night. You breathe in, long and slow. The air tastes clean here, like chilled grass, wet stone, and the faintest trace of wood smoke lingering from a fire already out. Around you, the flock is still, blanketed in sleep, their warm bodies nestled into the slope like scattered pillows. A few blink lazily, eyes half open, half dreaming. You can almost believe that the whole field is breathing with you, in and out, together. Your muscles soften, your thoughts slow, stretching like tired limbs. You remember the blink of a sheep as the sky changed, and the quiet certainty of a shepherd who didn't need to run but still moved, because something had whispered that it was time, and maybe that's what this is all about. Not rushing, not solving, just noticing, blink by blink, step by step. A world not rushed but read slowly, carefully, kindly. Let your eyes close now. Let the landscape fade. Let the soft hum of silence and the occasional sheep sigh ease your mind. Let the last flicker of worry blink once, then disappear. There's no storm tonight, no rush, no signs to follow, only stillness, only sleep. And the sheep, they'll keep watch.